I came home to bury my grief and found my whole life thrown out on the lawn, like it was garbage set out for collection. My daughter-in-law walked out the front door of my house wearing a dress that cost more than I used to make in a month, looked at the pile of my belongings baking on the dead grass, and told me in that soft voice she saved for company that they had decided to do a clean-out and that all those old things were useless now. I stood there on the driveway in the black dress I had worn to my sister's funeral 1,100 miles away, and I looked her dead in the eyes, and I answered her calmly. "Then I will also clean out whatever is no longer useful to me," I said, and I reached into my purse and took out my phone. It was time to remind everyone in that house who actually held the deed to the ground they were standing on. I will never forget that afternoon as long as I live, because that was the moment my life split cleanly in two, the before and the after. I had just driven back from Albuquerque. I had spent 4 months out there, watching my younger sister Faye lose a fight with pancreatic cancer, holding her hand through the worst of it. And then I had buried her under a hard blue New Mexico sky with her 2 grown sons weeping on either side of me. I was 68 years old, and I had just put the last person from my own generation into the ground. I came back to Tucson hollowed out. I came back needing nothing more complicated than a cup of hot tea, a quiet room, and my son Dale to put his arms around me and tell me he was sorry for my loss. What I got instead was the sight of my late husband's coats and my grandmother's quilt and 40 years of photographs scattered across the front yard of the house I had bought with my own 2 hands. It was my house. I want that understood from the very beginning because everything that came after turns on it. That 2-story stucco house at 214 Ironwood Lane with the low desert garden out front, I paid for every brick and every window of it myself. I spent 40 years keeping books and preparing tax returns for half the small businesses on the east side of Tucson, running my own little office out of a strip mall next to a laundromat, adding columns and chasing receipts until my eyes went bad. My husband Walter was a mechanic, a good one, but he passed 10 years back and left me with a paid-off house, a rental duplex over on the south side, and a 1966 Ford Mustang he had rebuilt from a rusted shell in our garage over the course of 6 years. When Dale married Sabrina 3 years ago, I did what a mother does. I handed him the keys to that house and told him to raise his family in it. I never asked for $1. I only ever asked for one thing, and I will come back to that, because it is the whole game. I dropped my purse on the driveway without meaning to. I felt the air go out of my chest as if someone had put a hand flat against my sternum and pushed. There were my belongings, my real belongings, the ones you cannot replace at a store. My children's baby books, Walter's watch box, the hand-stitched quilt my grandmother made the winter before she died, folded once and then dumped sideways into a bougainvillea so that the thorns had already snagged the corner of it. Everything I owned that mattered piled up next to the Palo Verde tree I had planted myself the spring after we moved in, dropping its little yellow flowers over the wreckage of my life. Sabrina came down those front steps like she was walking a runway. Her hair had that fresh salon shine to it. Her nails were done. Her makeup was flawless, and I remember thinking in the strange, flat way your mind works during a shock that she looked like she had just come from a spa, while I looked like I had just come from a grave because I had. "Oh, Lois," she said, and she smiled that smile. "It's so good you're back. We decided to do a deep clean while you were away. All that old stuff was just taking up so much space, and honestly, it was useless. Useless," I repeated slowly. "Sabrina, those are my belongings. Those are my children's baby books. Those are Walter's things." She waved her hand at me the way you shoo a fly off a plate. "Oh, I know," she said, "but we needed the room. We're turning your old bedroom into the nursery. Didn't Dale tell you I'm 3 months along?" And that was how I found out I was going to be a grandmother standing over my own life in the dirt, being told by the woman who had thrown it there. I felt the news land somewhere under my ribs, sharp and cold. 3 months pregnant, and this was how they chose to tell me after the eviction, not before. "I need to talk to Dale," I managed to say, and I hated that my voice cracked on his name. "He's at work," she said. "Pharmacy inventory, he'll be late. But don't you worry, we saved you a spot. Come on, I'll show you." And she took my arm with that fake warmth that had always set my teeth on edge, and she walked me around the side of the house to the converted garage. She opened the door with a little flourish like she was showing me a suite at a resort. The room was maybe 8 feet by 10. There was a folding cot with a thin-stained mattress against one wall. The single window looked out onto the block wall of the alley. It smelled of motor oil and damp concrete and the mouse traps somebody had set in the corners. "We fixed it up a little," she said. "It's cozy, but we do need you to keep to yourself, Lois. The pregnancy has me very sensitive to stress, and the doctor says I can't have any drama around me right now." I looked at that cot. I looked at that stain. And I felt two things move inside me at exactly the same time, which is a thing I did not know a body could do. Something broke some soft old hope I had been carrying about what my last years would look like. And underneath the place where it broke, something else caught fire. I took a slow breath, and I turned to face her, and I found that my voice had gone very steady, steadier than it had been in months. "You know what, Sabrina," I said. "You're right. It is time for a clean-out. A good deep one. Time to clear out everything in my life that no longer serves me." Her smile flickered just for a second like a bulb about to go. I took my phone back out of my purse where I had shoved it, and I scrolled to a number I had kept saved for 11 years. Harold Pruitt, my lawyer. "What are you doing?" she said, and the sweetness had drained right out of her. "Cleaning up," I told her. "Exactly like you suggested." I pressed the call button and I lifted the phone to my ear, and while it rang, I looked Sabrina straight in the eyes, and I did not look away, not once, which after 3 years of looking at the floor around that woman felt like the first honest thing I had done in her presence. Because in that moment I understood something clean and simple. I had given my son that house out of love, but I had never signed away my dignity, and I certainly had never signed away the deed. Harold picked up with the third ring. "Lois," he said, and his voice was already gentle because he knew where I had just been. "What happened?" I told him I needed to see him first thing in the morning, that it was urgent, and I said it without taking my eyes off my daughter-in-law. "Are you all right?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I'm going to be," and I hung up. Sabrina crossed her arms over her middle. "I don't know what you think you're planning, Lois," she said, "but I'll remind you that this house belongs to Dale now, and I am his wife, and if you want to stay under this roof, you are going to live by our rules." I clenched my teeth so hard I felt it in my ears. I wanted to tell her that I had scrubbed other people's toilets and balanced other people's books to buy the roof she was talking about, that Dale had been a 25-year-old kid with nothing when I put a paid-off house in his lap. But I said none of it, because I had learned one thing over 68 years, and it is this. Words without power behind them are just noise, and I did not have my power back yet. So I would go quiet, and I would go to work the way I always had. "All right," I said simply. "I'll take the utility room." She blinked. She had braced herself for a fight, for tears, for me to beg, and instead I had agreed, and it threw her completely. "Oh," she said, recovering. "Good. I'm glad you're being reasonable. And another thing, there's no room in the refrigerator for your food, so you'll need to buy your own and keep it out here. The doctor says I need calm." "Of course," I said. "No trouble at all." "Perfect," she said, and she turned and walked back toward the house with a little sway in her hips, like a woman who had just won something. Let her think it, I thought. Let her walk tall today. She had no idea she was walking across my floor. I sat down on the edge of that cot, and I let myself cry, but only for a little while, and quietly so the sound would not carry to the house. I cried for Faye, who had been the only person left alive who remembered me as a girl. I cried for Walter, who would have put his fist through a wall before he let anyone speak to me that way. I cried for the woman I used to be, the one who ran her own business and raised 3 children alone after her husband died, and never once thought of herself as somebody's burden. And then I stopped and I wiped my face on the back of my hand, and I remembered my own mother who raised 5 of us by herself after our father walked out. She used to tell us that a woman is not strong because of what she owns. She is strong because of what she is able to rebuild after everything she owns is taken from her. So I took out my phone again, and instead of crying, I started taking pictures. My belongings on the lawn, the stained cot, the mouse traps, the bougainvillea with my grandmother's quilt hanging out of it. Because I had spent 40 years in the business of proof, and I knew that the truth without documentation is just your word against theirs. Dale did not come home until after 11. I heard his truck pull into the drive. I heard the front door, and I heard Sabrina's voice, bright and quick, and then her laugh. And I sat on that cot in the dark, and I waited for my son to come out to the garage. I was sure he would. He had just lost his aunt too, after all, and surely he would come knock on the door and ask how the funeral had been, ask how I was holding up. I waited until the lights in the main house went dark. He never came. At midnight, I could not stand it anymore. I got up and walked barefoot across the cold driveway and let myself in the side door and went down the hallway of my own house feeling like a trespasser in it. I knocked softly on the master bedroom door. "Dale," I said. "It's your mother. I need to talk to you." There was a long silence, and then the door opened a few inches, and my son looked out at me. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, real weight, the kind that hollows out a face. There were dark rings under his eyes. "Mom," he whispered. "It's late. What's wrong?" "What's wrong?" I repeated, and I felt my voice start to shake. "Dale, they put all my things out on the lawn. They put me in the garage. And nobody told me your wife is expecting until I heard it standing in the driveway." He looked down at his own bare feet. "Mom, I was going to tell you, but you were in Albuquerque with Aunt Faye, and there was never a good time." "I just buried my sister Dale," I said. "I said goodbye to the last of my family, and I drove 1,100 miles home, and I got treated like something you leave out for the trash truck." "It's not personal, Mom," he said, rubbing his eyes. "We just need the space. With the baby coming, things have to change." "Change," I said. "Dale, I bought this house. I gave it to you because I wanted us to be a family under one roof. And we are, Mom," he said, "but Sabrina, she's stressed the pregnancy has been hard. The doctor says we can't upset her." "And what about me?" I asked, and there was a lump in my throat the size of a fist. "Don't I matter?" He sighed, and he would not look at me, and he said the thing I have never been able to fully forgive. "Of course you matter, Mom, but Sabrina's my family now. She's my priority. You always taught us that when you get married, your spouse comes first." Every word was a small, clean cut. "Not like this, son," I whispered. "You don't get to twist what I taught you into this." "Mom, please," he said. "We're both exhausted. We'll talk tomorrow. Try to understand." And he closed the door in my face. My Dale, the boy whose fevers I sat up with, whom I taught to read at the kitchen table, who used to call me his hero. That grown man shut a door in my face and went back to bed. I walked back out to the garage, but I did not cry this time, because the grief in me had started turning into something harder and more useful. I sat down on the cot and I opened the small toolbox I had carried in from my car, the one where I keep my important papers, because a bookkeeper never travels without her papers. And I took out something almost nobody knew I kept. A ledger. A plain green accountant's ledger where out of 40 years of habit I had been keeping a quiet record of the house ever since I handed it to Dale. Not to spy on him. I want that clear. When I gave him the keys, I asked him for exactly one thing, the one thing I mentioned before. "Son," I said, "just keep me in the loop on the big expenses, not to control you, but because a house is an asset, and assets have to be tended." And for the first year he did. He showed me receipts, told me about the new water heater, the roof patch. We were a team. And then he married Sabrina, and the update stopped, and I let them stop because I trusted him, and because I was busy with my dying sister. I opened that ledger under the bare bulb of the garage, and I started turning the pages, and what I found on the last few made the blood go cold and still in my veins. I have always been careful with money. When you grow up poor, you learn young that every dollar is accountable to you. When I handed Dale the house, I also left him a debit card tied to my savings account, the account that held my retirement, the severance from selling my bookkeeping practice, and 30-odd years of setting aside a little at a time. Nearly $55,000. "This is for real emergencies," I told him, "so you will never be stuck." In 3 years, I had never once used that card myself. I only glanced at the statements now and then. But sitting on that cot, I pulled the most recent statement out of my papers, and I looked at the balance, and I had to put my hand flat on the cold concrete floor to steady myself. $8,140. Out of nearly $55,000, that was what was left. More than $40,000 gone in the span of 8 months while I was in New Mexico watching my sister die. But the money, as much as it hurt, was not the thing that froze me. It was the second envelope in my papers, the one I had grabbed off the hall table on my way out the side door and not yet opened. It was addressed to me, Lois Bancroft, at 214 Ironwood Lane, from a bank I had never done business with in my life. I tore it open under that bulb, and it was a past due notice for a credit card account I had never opened, with a balance climbing toward $11,000, and my name typed clean across the top of it. And down at the bottom in the account holder information was my date of birth and the last 4 digits of a Social Security number that was mine. I sat very still. In 40 years of bookkeeping, I had seen this exact shape of wrongdoing land on other families, and I knew its name the way you know the name of a snake by the pattern on its back. This was not overspending. This was not a family borrowing against itself. Somebody had taken my papers, my real papers, the ones that had been sitting in a file box in the bedroom they threw me out of, and they had opened accounts in my name. And the only people who had lived in that house with access to that file box were my son and his wife. I did not sleep. Toward 2 a.m, I put a robe on over my nightgown, and I slipped back out and I walked the 20 yards to the little house next door because there was a light on in Edith Farrow's kitchen. Edith was near 80, a widow like me, up before the birds every day of her life, and she had known me for 20 years. I tapped on her kitchen door and she opened it in her housecoat and took one look at my face and pulled me inside and put a cup of coffee in front of me before I said a word. "Honey," she said, sitting down across from me and taking both my rough hands in her own, "I didn't want to say anything to you while you were burying your sister. But I have seen things at that house these last months, and I think it's time you heard them." "Tell me," I said. "Your daughter-in-law, she said she doesn't work, does she?" "No," I said. "Dale says she doesn't need to." "Well, honey, that girl has had 3 different cars in this driveway since spring. A red one, then a white one, then a gray one. And the bags she carries in from them are from those stores at La Encantada, the kind where one purse is a month of my Social Security. And Dale," she went on, lowering her voice, "your boy leaves before 6 and comes home after dark, and he's gotten so thin, Lois. He looks like a man being worn down to nothing." I felt the cold spread through my chest. Was there anything else, I asked, and Edith hesitated, and then she said the thing that made me set the coffee cup down before I dropped it. "About 2 weeks ago," she said while you were still gone, "a flatbed came and they took Walter's Mustang. Sabrina stood right there in the driveway in her sunglasses and watched them load it, and she took an envelope of cash from the man and counted it right there on the hood." The room went quiet except for the tick of Edith's kitchen clock. Walter's Mustang. 6 years of his evenings and weekends, his hands under that hood, the car he was going to teach our grandchildren to drive one day. She had sold it out of my driveway like a piece of scrap while I stood over my sister's grave. "How much?" I asked, and my voice came out of me flat and strange. Edith shook her head. "I don't know, honey, but it wasn't much." The man drove a small truck and paid cash. I nodded slowly. In my head, the pieces were sliding together into one clear and terrible picture. The drained savings, the credit card in my name, the car sold for a fraction of its worth, my belongings on the lawn, the garage. Sabrina was not just pushing me out of my house. She was erasing me, taking my money, my husband's memory, my very name, and turning it all into cash and closet space. And my son was letting it happen, or worse, helping it happen. I walked back to the garage as the sky over the Rincon Mountains was just starting to go gray at the edges. I sat on the cot with the ledger and the bank statement and the credit card notice spread across my knees, and I made a decision as the sun came up. If they wanted to play this way, then we would play, but by my rules, because there were 3 things those 2 did not know. They did not know that the house had never actually been signed over, that I had given Dale only my verbal permission to live in it, and never once set foot in a title company. They did not know that I had kept documentation of everything 40 years of habit that they had mistaken for a harmless old woman's clutter. And they did not know that the woman sitting on that cot at dawn was not the same woman who had pulled into the driveway the afternoon before. That woman had been broken, but out of the pieces something harder was already standing up. By the time the sun cleared the mountains, I had the beginning of a plan, and I promise you, not in their worst nightmares could Dale and Sabrina have imagined what I was about to do. At 9 o'clock sharp, I was going to be sitting in Harold Pruitt's office, and what he was about to tell me across that desk was going to turn my whole world and theirs completely upside down. I washed up at the utility sink in the garage because Sabrina had locked the main bathroom so I could not use her hot water, and I put on the same black dress I had worn to Faye's funeral. And I pinned my hair back into a tight bun, because I had learned a long time ago that when you go to fight for what is yours, you go looking like a woman who cannot be dismissed. Harold Pruitt met me at his office door at 9 o'clock sharp and folded me into a long, careful hug. "Lois," he said, "I am so sorry about Faye. She was a fine woman." "Thank you, Harold," I said, and I felt the lump rise in my throat, but I pushed it down. I did not come here to grieve. I came here to work. We sat down across his desk, and he poured me a glass of water and waited, and I laid it all out for him. The ledger, the bank statement showing my savings gone from nearly $55,000 down to $8,140. The past due notice from a bank I had never done business with for a credit card in my name that I had never opened. The photographs of my belongings on the lawn of the stained cot of the empty spot in the driveway where Walter's Mustang used to sit. I watched Harold's face change as I talked from sympathy to attention to something harder, the look a man gets when the numbers in front of him stop being sad and start being actionable. When I finished, he leaned back and rubbed his jaw for a moment. "Lois," he said, "this is serious, very serious, and I want to take it in the right order, because some of what you have here is one kind of trouble, and some of it is a very different kind. Start with the house," he said. "Do you have the deed?" I did. I had kept it in a fireproof box for 11 years, and I slid it across the desk to him. He put on his glasses and turned it over slowly, page by page, with the patience of a man who had read 10,000 of these, and then he looked up at me, and he almost smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who has just found the loose thread in the other side's whole sweater. "Lois," he said, "do you understand what you have here?" "Tell me," I said. "This deed is 100% in your name. Yours alone. There is no other name on it. Dale never recorded a transfer. He never filed a thing." My heart gave a hard knock against my ribs. "But I gave it to him," I said. "I told him 3 years ago it was his." Harold shook his head slowly. "In Arizona," he said, "a gift of real property is not valid on a handshake or on a mother's word at a wedding. It requires a signed and delivered deed properly executed and ideally recorded with the county. You never did any of that. You gave Dale what the law calls a tenancy at will. In plain English, Lois, you let him live there. You loaned him the house. But that house is still yours, every square foot of it, and you can revoke that permission whenever you choose." For the first time since I had pulled into that driveway, I felt something in my chest that was not grief and was not fury. It was solid ground under my feet. "So what does that mean?" I asked. "It means," he said, "that legally they are your tenants with no lease, no ownership, no permanent right to possession. You could give them notice to vacate." Now he held up a hand before I could speak. "We are not going to do anything rash because you have a pregnant daughter-in-law in that house, and a judge takes note of things like that. But the ground is yours. Everything we do next, we do from that ground." "And the money?" I asked. "The $40,000 and this." I put my finger on the credit card notice. Harold picked it up and read it, and then he read it again, and his jaw set. "All right," he said. "Now this is where the two kinds of trouble split apart, and you need to understand the difference because it matters. The savings account," he said. "You gave Dale a debit card tied to it, correct?" "I did," I said. "For emergencies. Then that spending wrong as it is a civil matter. He had your authorization to use that card. Getting that money back is a negotiation, not a crime, and we will use every bit of leverage that house gives us to negotiate hard. But it is not something the police will touch, because you handed him the key. But this," he said, and he tapped the credit card notice. "This is the other kind of trouble entirely. Did you open this account?" "No," I said. "Did you give anyone permission to open a credit account in your name using your social security number?" "No," I said. "Never. Then this Lois is identity theft, and in this state that is a felony, not a family disagreement. Somebody took your personal documents, your social security number, your date of birth. The papers that were in a file box in the bedroom, they moved you out of and opened credit in your name. And if the car was sold with a title that had your signature forged on it, because that Mustang was titled to you, not to Dale, then that is a second felony forgery. These are not things you negotiate over a dinner table. These are things you report, because right now your credit, your name, your financial life is being run into the ground by someone else. And the only way to protect yourself is to put it on the record with the police and the credit bureaus today. Do you understand the difference I am drawing?" "I understand it," I said. "The money they spent on my card is ours to fight over. But the accounts they opened in my name are not a fight. They are a crime, and I have to report them to protect myself." "Exactly right," he said. "And we do that regardless of how the family part shakes out, because that is you defending Lois Bancroft, not you punishing your son." I sat with that for a moment because it steadied something in me. I did not want to send my son to jail. Even then, even that morning, I did not. But I would not lie down and let my own name be looted either. "Harold," I said, "I don't want to destroy Dale." "Then here is what we do," he said, and he began to write on a legal pad. "First today we change every password and lock down every account that is actually yours, and we put a freeze on your credit, so nobody can open one more thing in your name. Second, today you file a report on the identity theft and the forged title because that clock starts now and it protects you. Third, we take a formal inventory of what was in that house when you loaned it to Dale, including that Mustang, so there is a record of what was yours. And fourth, he said we give Dale and Sabrina a choice. They sign a real lease with real rent and a written agreement to repay the money taken off your savings card in monthly installments. Or they receive formal notice to vacate. Rent, I said. From my own son. Harold looked at me over his glasses with the steady eyes of a man who had watched 100 families come apart across that desk. Lois, he said, your son let his wife throw your life on the lawn, put you in a garage, drain your retirement, and sell your late husband's car. Do you truly believe he has earned the right to keep living in your house for free? He was right. He was completely right. I left his office 3 hours later with frozen credit, a police report number, changed passwords, a written plan, and something I had not carried in a long time. My spine back under me. I bought myself a coffee and a sweet roll at a bakery on the way home, and I sat on a bench in the sun and ate it slowly and watched the people go by, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something loosen in my chest. They thought they had beaten me. They thought I would bow my head and shuffle off to the garage and be grateful for the corner they had left me. They had no idea. I was not a defeated old woman. I was a bookkeeper who had just found the discrepancy, and there is nothing on this earth more dangerous than a woman who has found the discrepancy and has the documents to prove it. I got back to the house around 6 that evening with 3 grocery bags because if they wanted me to live like a tenant, I would, but I would do it with my head up. I had a little hot plate, a small pot, some groceries, and when I came in the side door, I heard voices in the living room. Many voices. I looked around the corner and my stomach tightened. Sabrina was there, dressed like she was going to a gala in a pale pink dress, and beside her on my sofa were her parents. Warren Kessler, a big man with a heavy mustache and the air of somebody used to being the loudest one in the room, and Gail Kessler, a thin, elegant woman who had always looked at me like I was something she had stepped in. And Dale, my Dale, sat off to the side in a pressed shirt, pulling at his collar like it was choking him, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. Lois Sabrina sang out when she saw me, "So glad you're home." I made a family dinner. My parents wanted to sit down and better understand our situation. Our situation, like I was a leak in the roof they had all gathered to discuss. "Good evening," I said, and I tried to move past them toward the garage, but Sabrina crossed the room fast and took my arm. "Oh no," she said, "I've set a place for you. It would be rude not to join us, and besides, we have some important things to talk about." So I sat down at my own dining table, the one I had bought at an estate sale 15 years ago, and Sabrina served a very nice dinner off my mother's china, and the whole room was pulled tight as a wire. Mrs. Bancroft Warren began dabbing his mustache with a napkin. "My daughter tells me there have been some misunderstandings lately." "Misunderstandings," I repeated, tasting the word. "Well," Gail said in her sharp little voice, "Sabrina says you feel displaced. But you have to understand, Mrs. Bancroft, that young people need their own space, especially now with the baby coming." I set down my fork. "I understand the need for space perfectly," I said, keeping my voice level. "What I do not understand is why my belongings were thrown out on the lawn while I was at my sister's funeral without so much as a phone call." "Oh, Lois, let's not rehash that," Sabrina said, waving her hand. "It was a simple miscommunication. I already apologized." She had never apologized. Not once. "And really," Warren went on, "I think it's very generous of Dale and Sabrina to have given you a space at all. Plenty of folks your age don't have family willing to take them in. People my age, like I was a stray they had done a good deed by feeding." Dale said nothing. He looked at his plate. "Besides," Gail added, "at your age, Mrs. Bancroft, you really ought to be thinking about making things simpler for everyone. There are some lovely retirement communities now with nurses and activities and people your own age. Wouldn't that be more comfortable than a garage?" And there it was, the real reason for the china and the pink dress and the mustache dabbing. They had brought me to my own table to talk me into a home. I looked at my son. "Dale," I said, "what do you think about all this?" He finally looked up, and his eyes were tired and empty. "Mom," he said, "I just want everyone to be okay. I just want some peace." "Peace," I said. "You want peace while you sit at this table and let these people plan to put me in a facility." "It's not a facility, Mom," Sabrina jumped in. "They're luxury senior communities with gardens and—" "I'm not interested," I said, and the whole table went quiet as I held breath. Warren cleared his throat. Mrs. Bancroft, I understand this is hard, but you have to be realistic. Dale and Sabrina are building their family. And you, well, you've had your life. You raised your children. Now it's their turn. Every word was a slap, but I let them hit me because I had learned that the person who stays calm while the other side gets loud is the person who is about to win. And then Gail, in the tone of a woman discussing a quarterly report, said the thing that told me why they had really come. Sabrina mentioned there was some confusion with the bank accounts, she said. Some cards that stopped working. And there it was. They had not come about my feelings or the garage or even the nursing home, not really. They had come because the money had shut off and they wanted to know why. There is no confusion, I said, and I set my napkin down beside my plate. I simply changed the passwords on my accounts, as I should have done a long time ago. Sabrina dropped her fork onto the china with a crash. You see, Dale, she said, I told you your mother was acting strange. Why would you do that, Lois? That money is for the family. That money, I said, is mine. Money I earned over 40 years keeping other people's books. Money you spent without asking me more than $40,000 in 8 months while I was watching my sister die. What did you spend it on, Sabrina? Her face went white, then a blotchy red. How dare you, she hissed. How dare I said, and I stood up from my chair. Ask about my own money. Ask why my husband's car was sold out of my driveway for pocket change. And then I looked at all of them, and I said the thing that turned the room to stone. And while we're asking questions, maybe someone can tell me why there is a credit card in my name that I never opened at a bank. I have never once done business with run up to $11,000 using my Social Security number, which was sitting in a file box in the bedroom you moved me out of. The silence after that was total. Warren's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Gail's face lost its careful composure. And Dale, my Dale, went the color of paper. Mom, he said, what are you talking about? A credit card. In your name. I looked at him, and I could not tell in that moment whether my son was a criminal or only a coward, and I am not sure which one would have hurt worse. I filed a police report this afternoon, Dale, I said quietly, for identity theft, and for the forged title on your father's car, because that car was titled to me, not to you, and somebody signed my name to sell it. I did not do that to hurt anybody. I did it because someone is stealing my name, and I will not sit in a garage and let them. I watched Sabrina, and Sabrina would not meet my eyes, and that told me everything the paperwork had not yet proven. Warren slammed his hand flat on my table. Now see here, he said, you are being extremely rude to people who came here in good faith. Good faith, I said, and I let out a short, tired laugh. Was it good faith to throw my things on the lawn? Was it good faith to sell my husband's car? Was it good faith to open credit in an old woman's name while she buried her sister? And then I said the last card in my hand, and I laid it down flat. And by the way, this house is not Dale's. It never was. The deed is in my name and only my name. Dale never signed a thing. He lives here because I let him, and I can stop letting him whenever I choose. I have never in my life seen a room change so fast. Gail's mouth fell open. Warren looked at his daughter, then at Dale, then back at his daughter, and I watched something dawn on his face. And Sabrina turned on my son like a cornered animal. Tell me that's not true, she said, her voice climbing. Dale, you told me this house was ours. You promised me before we got married. Dale lifted his head slowly, and there were tears standing in his eyes. It's true, he whispered. I never finished the paperwork. I thought there was no rush. I thought Mom would never what Sabrina screamed. Never find out. Never take it back. You told me you owned a house. I married you because you had assets. And there, right there at my own dinner table off my mother's china, the truth came out of Sabrina's own mouth in front of all of us. She had not married my son for love. She had married him for a house. My house. Gail stood up so fast her chair scraped. This is unacceptable, she said. Warren, we are leaving. I am not going to sit here and be accused. They are not accusations, I said, still calm, still on my feet. They are facts, and I have the documents for every one of them. Warren jabbed a thick finger across the table at me. You are a bad mother, he said. A real mother would never do this to her own son. And that one, I will admit, found the soft place. It hurt more than the garage, more than the cot, more than the locked bathroom. But I did not let it move me. A real mother, I said, teaches her children honesty and respect and how to work for what they have. I did all of that. If Dale forgot it, that is a wound in him, and it is his to heal. It is not a debt I owe to you." And I turned and I walked toward the garage while behind me the dinner came apart. Sabrina crying, Gail shouting, Warren demanding to know what exactly was going on, and Dale in the middle of it, trying to hold a family together that had never really existed. Around 11 that night, the pounding started on the garage door. "Mom, open up, we have to talk." It was Dale. I did not open it. "Mom, please," he said through the door. "Sabrina is hysterical. The doctor said she can't have this kind of stress with the baby." I still did not open it. "What do you want me to do?" "Dale," I said finally through the door. "Beg your forgiveness on my knees. Tell me what you want and I'll do it. Just please don't take the house from us." I opened the door. He was a wreck, hair on end, eyes red shirt hanging off him, and for the first time in my life I looked at my grown son crying and felt no pull to comfort him. Only a great tired disappointment. "Dale," I said, "I am going to say this once and I want you to listen. I never wanted to take anything from you. I gave you this house out of love. I gave you my money out of trust. I know, Mom, I know. But you treated me like garbage," I said. "You humiliated me. You let my name be stolen. And when I came home broken from burying Faye, you closed a door in my face." "That was Sabrina," he said. "I didn't know about the credit card, I swear to you. You knew about the garage," I said. "You knew about the car. You knew I was sleeping on a cot in the room where you parked the lawnmower, and you did nothing." Dale sank down onto the concrete right there in the doorway with his head in his hands. "Forgive me," he said. "I was a coward. I was a bad son. But please, Mom, don't put us on the street." I looked down at him, and something in me settled into a cold, clear place. This was not my little boy anymore. This was a grown man who had made his choices, and grown men live with their choices. "I am not going to put you on the street," I said. "But everything changes now tonight. Tomorrow you come with me to Harold Pruitt's office, and you sign a lease with rent and a written agreement to pay back every dollar that came off my savings card monthly until it is whole. And Sabrina will get a job because the free ride is over." Dale nodded fast, desperate. "Yes," he said. "Anything." "And the credit account's in my name," I said. "Those get closed and cleared through the police report, and if it turns out your wife opened them, that is out of my hands and into the laws, because I have already reported it, and I am not going to unreport a crime against myself to make your marriage easier." He flinched at that, but he nodded. "Now go," I said. "I'm tired." He got up slowly, looking older than his 40 years, and at the door he turned back with the eyes of a whipped dog. "Do you hate me, Mom?" he asked. And that question broke something in me. "No, Dale," I said, and it came out sad instead of angry. "I don't hate you, but I don't know you anymore. The son I raised would never have let this happen to me." And I closed the door, and I slept that night for the first time in a week because I had won the first real battle. But the war was not over, and 3 days later my own body nearly ended it for me. Dale and I signed these papers in Harold's office the next morning, Sabrina beside him in dark glasses with a tissue at the ready, though she signed too because Harold made it very plain what the alternative was. Sabrina took a job within the week at a department store perfume counter, a woman who had never worked a day since I had known her, and I will not pretend some small hard part of me did not take note of it. For 3 days there was an uneasy quiet in the house. And on the 3rd morning, I woke on that cot with a pain in my chest that was not sadness. It was a real physical, terrifying pressure, like a fist closing around my heart, and when I tried to sit up, my legs would not answer me and the air would not come, and the little room began to spin. I got one hand up and knocked against the wall twice, and on the 3rd try my arm went heavy and slid down the concrete, and everything went dark. I woke in a hospital bed under lights that hurt my eyes with a needle in my arm and a machine beeping somewhere beside me. A nurse leaned over me. "There you are, Mrs. Bancroft," she said. "You gave us a scare." "What happened?" I asked, and my voice came out like gravel. "You had what's called stress cardiomyopathy," she said. "Some people call it broken heart syndrome. It's brought on by severe emotional strain, and it's more common in women your age than most people know. Your neighbor found you and called the ambulance. You are very lucky she came by when she did. Edith, my guardian angel up before the birds even to save my life." "How long have I been here?" I asked. "About 8 hours, the nurse said. And your family is here. 2 of your children flew in. They landed a little while ago. 2 of my children." "Dale," I said. The nurse hesitated in a way I understood completely. Your son who lives in town was notified, she said gently. He hasn't come. And that hurt worse than the fist around my heart had. My Dale, 20 minutes away, had not come. But my Nadine had flown in from Denver, and my Curtis from Austin, hundreds of miles the moment Edith called them, and when they came through that door, it was like two storms blowing in at once. Nadine, my Nadine, 37 years old, and an emergency room doctor herself, so she came in already reading my monitor before she even reached the bed, her face wet. And Curtis, 34, a building contractor with sawdust still in the cuffs of his shirt, his buttons done up crooked like he had dressed in the dark, which he probably had. Mom, Nadine said, and she took my hand and pressed it to her cheek. Thank God. Curtis got hold of my other hand and squeezed it too hard. What happened, Mom? He said. Edith called us in tears, saying she found you on the floor. Why didn't you tell us you were being treated like this? Why didn't you call? I didn't want to worry you, I whispered. Worry us, Nadine said, wiping her eyes and getting angry the way she does when she is scared. Mom, you almost died. And so I told them. Both of them from the beginning. The funeral, the belongings on the lawn, the garage, the drained savings, the sold Mustang, the credit card in my name, all of it. I watched my two youngest go from worried to disbelieving to a fury so cold and quiet it frightened me a little. Dale did what Nadine said, standing up. I'm going over there right now, Curtis said, and he was already halfway to the door. No, I said with what little strength I had. It's handled. Harold Pruitt has it. There are papers signed. Sit down, both of you. And they sat because I was still their mother. Nadine took out her phone and called Dale. It rang and went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail again. He is sending me to voicemail, she said in a voice I would not have wanted aimed at me. Curtis tried and got the same. Mom, Nadine said, putting her phone away with sharp little movements. When you get out of here, you are coming to Denver with me. I can't, I said. I have things here. Mom, I have secrets you clearly don't know about, she said, half laughing and half crying. What things? And so I told them the last thing, the thing not even Dale knew. That I still owned the little rental duplex on the south side that I inherited from Walter, that I had been quietly collecting the rent on it into an account of my own for 10 years, that I had never touched and never mentioned because a widow learns to keep a door of her own that no one else has a key to. My two children looked at each other. Mom, Curtis said slowly, How many more of these do you have? They're not secrets, I said. They're just precautions. You learn to take care of yourself when you've buried a husband. The doctor came in, then an older man with wire glasses and a serious mouth, and he told my children and me the truth of it plainly. The episode was brought on by acute, prolonged stress, he said. Your mother's blood pressure has been at dangerous levels for some time. If we do not make real changes to what she is living with, the next event may not be so forgiving. He looked right at me. Mrs. Bancroft, he said, I am not going to write you a prescription that tells you to cut people out of your life. That is not medicine's place. But I will tell you as your doctor that you cannot heal in a place where you are being wounded every day, and if I were advising my own mother, I would tell her to put real distance between herself and whatever is doing this to her for at least a few months until this heart has a chance to settle. Nadine squeezed my hand. She'll have it, she said. I'll see to it myself. They kept me 2 more days. Nadine stayed in town in a hotel near the hospital and would not leave my side. Curtis had to fly back to a job site in Austin, but he called 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night, without fail. And Dale never came. Not a visit, not a call, not a text. And I stopped waiting for one because lying in that bed I had finally understood something I had been too tender to admit. I had been looking for love in a place that had run dry. Dale had shown me who he had let himself become, and my job now was not to keep knocking on that door. My job was to heal and to lean for once in my life on the 2 children who had dropped everything and come running. But there was one more thing, and it would not leave me alone. And it is the reason I want you to understand what kind of woman I am. Even flat on my back in that hospital bed, some part of my mind was still keeping the books, and that part kept circling back to a small nagging discrepancy that had nothing to do with the money. In all those papers, I had been through the bank statements, the file box, the mail on the hall table, and all of it going back months. There had not been one single thing connected to a pregnancy. No doctor's bill, no insurance statement for a prenatal visit, no lab work, no ultrasound, no maternity claim, nothing. A woman 3 months along in a house that spent $40,000 in 8 months on cars and handbags, and not $1, Not one piece of paper spent on the baby that was supposedly the whole reason I had been thrown into a garage. I lay there in the dark and I turned that over and over the way you worry a stone in your pocket, and I did not say a word about it yet, not even to Nadine. But I made a note of it the way I had made notes my whole life, and I filed it away, and I knew with the cold, sure instinct of 40 years of finding the thing that does not add up, that when I was well enough to stand, I was going to go looking for the answer myself. Because the story was not over. It was in fact just about to turn. I did not go to Denver. I want you to know that because it matters to how the rest of this went. Nadine begged me and Curtis begged me over the phone, but I told them both the same thing. I am not going to run from my own city with my tail tucked. I am going to heal on my own ground, and then I am going to finish this. So Nadine helped me lease a small apartment near the university, 1 bedroom, a little kitchen, a window that caught the morning light, and I paid for it out of the rental duplex account that no one but me had ever touched. Nadine stayed a week helping me settle in hanging curtains, buying a rocking chair, filling the sills with pots of desert marigold, and for the first time in months, I woke up somewhere clean and quiet and mine. My blood pressure came down. The doctor was pleased. And as my body settled, my mind sharpened back into the shape it had held for 40 years, the shape that finds the number that does not belong. Because I had not forgotten the discrepancy. A woman 3 months pregnant in a house bleeding money on cars and handbags, and not $1 spent on a doctor, not one insurance statement, not one lab bill, not one anything. In my whole career, I had learned that when the paperwork for a thing does not exist very often, the thing does not exist either. And so when I was strong enough to sit at a desk for a few hours without the room tilting, I did what the woman in the old version of this story never did. I did not wait for someone to bring me the truth. I went and hired it. I took $800 out of my rental account and I retained a private investigator, a quiet retired sheriff's deputy named Ray Ostrander that Harold Pruitt trusted, and I asked him one question. Tell me who my daughter-in-law was before she married my son. While Ray worked, I did my own kind of investigating, the only kind I have ever been good at. I called the bank calm as anything, and as the legitimate account holder, I requested full records. I called Walter's old insurer. I pulled every statement I could lawfully pull on accounts that were mine, and I built a timeline on a legal pad month by month, the way I used to reconstruct a client's year from a shoebox of receipts. And the more I built, the clearer the empty space in the middle of it became. There was no pregnancy in the paper. There never had been. The nursery the doctor's orders about stress the 3 months along announced over my ruined belongings, all of it floated on top of the records without a single anchor into them. Ray called me on a Thursday morning and asked to come by. He sat at my little kitchen table and set a folder down between us, and his face was the careful flat face of a man who has delivered bad news for a living. Mrs. Bancroft, he said, I'm going to lay this out plain because you strike me as a woman who would rather have it plain. Please, I said. First, he said there is no record anywhere of a current pregnancy. No obstetrician, no clinic, no prescriptions, nothing. Second, and here is the part I'm sorry to bring you, your daughter-in-law has a documented medical history from years back, from before she ever met your son, of a condition that makes carrying a child on her own effectively impossible. She has known that about herself since she was a young woman. I sat very still. So she is not pregnant, I said. No, ma'am, Ray said, and in my professional opinion, based on the history, she never was. I had known it was coming. I had built the timeline myself. And still hearing a man say it out loud in my kitchen, I had to put my hand flat on the table again, the way I had on the garage floor, because the enormity of it kept knocking me sideways. My son had thrown his mother into a garage, drained her savings, and stood by while her name was stolen, all to make room for a baby that had never existed. There is more, Ray said gently, and he opened the folder. Your daughter-in-law's name changes across the records. Before she was Sabrina Kessler, she used 2 other last names, and attached to each one is a man, and attached to each man is the same shape of story. She meets someone with an asset, a house, a business, a good bit of money. There is a pregnancy that comes on fast and ends quietly a few months in a miscarriage. Deeply sad, no one questions it. And somewhere in the middle of all that grief, money moves and things get sold, and then she is gone. Your son, Mrs. Bancroft, is not the first. He is the third that I can document. I thanked Ray and I paid him, and after he left, I sat at that table until the morning light had crossed the whole floor and climbed the far wall. And then I did something that I think surprised even me. I did not call Dale. I did not call the police, not yet. I called Gail Kessler, because a mother knows a mother, and I had watched Gail's face come apart at that dinner table when the credit card came up, and I had a feeling, the same kind of feeling that used to tell me which line in a ledger to check first, that Gail Kessler was a woman sitting on a secret that was eating her alive. I told her I had documents about her daughter and that I was going to act on them, and that I was giving her one chance to tell me the truth before I did. There was a long silence on the line, and then Gail Kessler started to cry, and the whole thing came out of her like water through a broken dam. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and Nadine came with me because I was not going to sit alone across from anyone connected to Sabrina ever again. Gail looked 10 years older than she had at that dinner. Her hands shook around her cup. "Thank you for coming," she said, "and thank you for calling me first." "You didn't have to." "What is the truth, Mrs. Kessler?" Nadine said in the flat, clear voice she uses on frightened patients. And Gail told us. Her daughter could not have children, had known it since she was 18, and had built her whole adult life around a lie she told to men with something worth taking. She had been doing it for more than a decade. Gail and Warren had covered her debts 4 separate times. They had watched her do it to 2 other men before Dale, and they had said nothing because she was their only child, and because Sabrina had told them plainly that if they ever exposed her, they would never see her again. "I couldn't do it anymore," Gail wept. "When Warren saw what she'd done to your name, to your money, to your husband's car, something in him just broke. He hasn't been himself. And last week she came to us asking for $5,000 to buy fake pregnancy tests to keep it going, and I sat in my kitchen and I thought, I'm going to help her destroy one more good family, and I could not do it." "I will need all of it in writing," Nadine said, already thinking like the daughter of a bookkeeper. "Certified copies. And you may have to say it to a judge." "Whatever it takes," Gail said. "I just want it to stop before she ruins anyone else." And then she reached across the table and took my hand in both of hers the way Edith had that first night, and she said, "Thank you for protecting your son. Even after everything he let happen to you, you are more of a mother to him than I have been to my girl." And that was true, and it hurt, and I let it hurt, because some true things you have to sit inside of for a while. That evening I called Dale and I told him to come to my apartment the next day at 2 o'clock, and to bring Sabrina, and I told him if they did not come to me, I would come to them, and he did not want that. They came. Sabrina walked in with a sour, wary look and a hand resting on a stomach that I noticed the moment she crossed my threshold was as flat as it had been the day she threw my life on the lawn. She was claiming past 5 months now. There was nothing there. Nadine stood by the window with a folder. Dale sat on my little sofa looking like a man walking to his own sentencing. "What is this?" he said. "Why is Nadine here?" "Because what I'm about to tell you is going to knock the floor out from under you," I said, "and you are going to need your sister in the room." And then I laid it down piece by piece the way I had laid it down for Harold, except this time I was laying it down for my son. I told him about the credit accounts opened in my name and the forged title on his father's car, and I set the police report on the table. And then I told him the rest. That there was no pregnancy, that there never had been, that his wife had a condition that made it impossible that she had known since she was 18, that her own mother had confirmed every word of it and would swear to it, that he was not the first man this had been done to, he was the third. Dale did not move for a long moment. Then he turned to Sabrina with a face I hope I never see on one of my children again. "Tell me it's not true," he said very quietly. Sabrina's voice climbed straight into a shriek. "She's lying. She said they're all lying. My mother hates me. Your mother has always hated me. They cooked this up to break us apart." "Then let's settle it right now," Dale said, and he stood up. "Let's drive to an urgent care this afternoon, and you get an ultrasound with me standing right there in the room, and we put this to bed." Sabrina froze. I watched her open her mouth and close it and open it again, and nothing came out. It's too late in the day," she said. "I'm not going to be humiliated like that." "You're past 5 months," Dale said, and his voice cracked right down the middle. "Look at yourself, Sabrina. Look at yourself." And in the silence that followed, everyone in that room understood that the answer had already been given. "Tell me the truth," Dale said, and he was crying now openly the way he cried when he was a boy and had done something he could not undo. "Please, just once, just tell me the truth." And Sabrina, cornered with no floor left under her, either went quiet and then small, and then she said it. "I'm not pregnant," she whispered. "I never was. The sound that came out of my son then is not a sound I have words for. He put both hands in his hair, and he bent over like something had struck him in the stomach, and he said, Why did you do this to me?" And Sabrina, cold now that the mask was off, said, "Because I needed the house, because I had debts, because you were there." "And what about me?" Dale said. "Didn't I matter? It was going to work," she said. "I was going to lose it in a month or two, and no one would ever have known. You would have gotten over it." "Get out," Dale said. He said it so quietly I barely heard it. "Get out of here." Sabrina stood and she looked at me, and all the sweetness she had ever aimed at me was gone, and in its place was pure flat hatred. "This is your fault," she hissed at me. "You ruined everything. We could have been happy." "Happiness built on a lie is not happiness," I said. "It is just a bill that hasn't come due yet. And yours just did." She grabbed her bag and she walked out and slammed my door so hard the marigolds shook on the windowsill. And my son slid off the sofa onto the floor of my little apartment and wept like his heart was coming apart in his hands. And I got down onto that floor with him 68 years old and 2 weeks out of a hospital bed, and I pulled my boy's head against my shoulder and I held him because whatever he had done to me, he was still the child I had carried. And there are some things a mother's body does without asking her permission. "I'm sorry, Mom," he kept saying. "You were right about everything, and I was a fool." "Shh," I told him, rocking him the way I had when he was small. "It's over now. It's over." The divorce moved fast, the way things move when one side is holding a folder full of forged signatures and a mother willing to testify against her own daughter. Sabrina tried to fight it. She demanded money she claimed distress. She even tried to tell a story about Dale mistreating her, and every lie of it crumbled against the paper. Gail Kessler kept her word and swore to all of it, and it was a terrible thing to watch a mother testifying to what her child was, and I did not enjoy 1 second of it no matter what that woman's daughter had done to me. Warren Kessler ended up in the hospital himself for a few days with his heart, and when he came out, he told Sabrina she was no longer welcome under his roof. She was left with nothing. No house, no husband, no family, and I will be honest with you, part of me pitied her, and part of me, the part that had slept on a cot in a garage while she paraded through my house in $300 dresses, understood that this was not cruelty. This was just the bill finally coming due in her own name for once. 2 months after the divorce was final, my phone rang and it was Harold Pruitt. "Lois," he said, "I have news and I think you'll want to sit down for it." I sat. "Sabrina was arrested this morning," he said. My stomach dropped in a way I did not expect. "Arrested," I said. "For what?" "It turns out Harold said that she moved out to Mesa and started the whole thing over again, a man she met online, a small business owner. Told him she was expecting moved money out of his accounts, sold some of his property. But this fellow was sharper than most, and he'd already gotten suspicious and hired an investigator of his own, and when it all came apart, he pressed charges. And once the police started pulling her history, your report surfaced too, the identity theft, the forged title on Walter's car. She is looking at fraud charges and identity theft charges, Lois, across more than one victim, and her own mother is a witness. This could be years." I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment. "How is Dale?" I asked. "Does he know?" "He knows," Harold said. "I told him an hour ago. He said he hopes she gets help and that it isn't his to carry anymore." "Good," I said. "That's a grown man talking." "There's one more thing," Harold said, and I could hear him smiling. "Your son has made every single payment. Rent and the repayment both on time, 4 months running, no complaints. And he wants to know if you'd have him over for Sunday dinner. He says he misses his mother." I made a pot roast that Sunday, his favorite since he was a boy, and Dale came to my little apartment with a grocery store bouquet and a chocolate cake, and a nervousness that reminded me so much of the child he had been that it put a lump in my throat before he'd even set the flowers down. He was thinner still, but there was something clear in his eyes that had not been there in 3 years, like a window that had finally been washed. We ate. We talked about his work, about the studio apartment he'd rented near the hospital, about Nadine and Curtis and the grandchildren in Denver and Austin that I did not see nearly enough. We talked about everything and nothing, the easy way we used to before Sabrina ever came into our lives, and it was for the first time in longer than I could remember, simple. And when we had finished, Dale set down his fork and took 2 envelopes out of his jacket, and his hands were shaking a little. "Open the small one first," he said. I did. Inside was a photograph of Walter's Mustang, unmistakable. That deep blue Walter had mixed himself parked in a lot I did not recognize. "I found it," Mom, Dale said quietly. Took me 3 months of calling around, but I found the man Sabrina sold it to, and I bought it back with my own money. Money I earned and saved not a dollar of anyone else's. It's being detailed. I'm having it brought to your house next week. To your house, Mom, where it belongs. I could not speak. I had made my peace with never seeing that car again, with that piece of Walter being gone the way Walter was gone, and here was my son handing it back to me. Now the other one, he said. And I opened the larger envelope, and inside were legal papers, and I saw Harold Pruitt's letterhead, and I saw the words quitclaim deed, and I looked up at my son. It was always yours, Mom, Dale said. The house. It was yours the whole time legally, and I know that now. But I wanted to sign this anyway in front of you, so that there is never again, as long as I live, any question, any loophole, any tenancy at will, any single crack that anyone could ever try to pry open again. I am signing away every claim I could ever make to that house, so that it is yours, clean and whole, and beyond argument for the rest of your life, and after that it goes wherever you say it goes. It's the opposite, he said, and his voice broke of what she did. She forged your name to take things from you. I'm signing my own name to give them back. Let me do this. Please. And I let him. And I signed where Harold had marked, and my son signed beside me, and it was the single most healing signature I have ever put on a piece of paper. 6 months after the worst day of my life, I was back in the house on Ironwood Lane. But it was different now, because I was different. I had painted the walls colors I chose. Curtis had come out from Austin for a week, and rebuilt the garden with me, and Walter's Mustang sat in the driveway under a cover waiting for the grandchildren it had always been meant for. And on a warm evening in the fall, the 4 of us sat out back under the bougainvillea I had planted with my own hands, a lifetime ago, me and Dale and Nadine and Curtis, drinking lemonade in the last of the light. Do you know what day it is today? I asked them. Nadine shook her head. 1 year ago today, I said I drove home from Faye's funeral and found my whole life thrown out on that lawn. An uncomfortable quiet settled over the table, and Dale looked down at his glass. No, I said, and I reached over and put my hand on his. I'm not saying it to wound you. I'm saying it because 1 year ago I thought I had lost everything. My house, my money, my dignity, my son. And what I actually lost, it turned out, was the lies, the fake family, the counterfeit love, the version of my son that only existed because I was too frightened to ask him to be better. And when all of that burned away, I finally got to see what was real. You 3, the ones who came running, the ones who fought for me. I learned something at 68 years old that I wish I had learned at 40, I told them, and I want to say it to you plainly so you carry it long after I'm gone. Dignity is not a thing you are given. It is a thing you defend. Respect is not a thing you beg for. It is a thing you require out loud, without apologizing for the sound of your own voice. And love, real love, the only kind worth having, does not put you in a garage and call it generosity. It does not throw your grandmother's quilt in the thorns and call it a clean out. Real love lifts you, and it is never not at any age, not after any loss, too late to clean out of your life everything and everyone that refuses to. I did it at 68. I sat there in my own garden, in my own house, with the deed in my own name, and my husband's car in the drive, and my true children around me, and I was at peace. And if you are still listening to this, I suspect it is because some part of it landed on something in you. Maybe you too have been made to feel like an old piece of furniture that has outlived its use. Maybe someone who was supposed to love you has taught you to be grateful for crumbs. So let me tell you the same thing I finally told myself on a folding cot in a garage in the dark. You are worthy. You have always been worthy. It does not matter your age. It does not matter how many times you have been made small. It does not matter whose voice in your head told you to sit down and be quiet. You have a right to your dignity, to your peace, to your own name kept clean. And if anyone at all tries to take those things from you, then it is time, as my daughter-in-law so helpfully put it, for a clean-out. A deep one. Because being alone with your dignity whole is 1,000 times better than being surrounded and made to kneel. I stood up at 68. You can stand up too. That night, after they had all gone home, I walked out into the garden alone and looked up at the same desert stars I had looked at a year before when I believed my life was over. It was not over. It had only started again. Thank you, Faye, I whispered to my sister, up in all that dark. Thank you for teaching me that life is too short to spend 1 hour of it on your knees. And the warm wind moved through the bougainvillea, and I swear to you, I felt her answer me, "You're welcome, little sister. Now go live." And that is exactly what I did.